against the person, liberty, or property of another, then the common force, for the same reason, cannot lawfully be used to destroy the person, liberty, or property of individuals or groups. Again, the sheriff or the government only has the power that the people themselves have. Anything outside the scope of the power that the people have is outside the scope of any power the sheriff might exercise. So there is a limitation on the power of government inherent in the delegation itself. In other words, we're not giving the sheriff a license to kill randomly, willy-nilly. He can't just go out and steal, kill, and destroy because he's got a gun and he's a sheriff. That would be unreasonable. But he does have the right to use lawful force to restrain injustice or to correct an abuse of theft or murder. If it was otherwise, if the sheriff has more power than we collectively have as a group, since an individual cannot lawfully use force against the person, then for the same reason the common force cannot lawfully be used to destroy the person, liberty, or property of individuals or groups. Were it otherwise, such a perversion of force would be contrary to our premise. Force has been given to us to defend our individual rights. Who would dare say that force has been given to us to destroy the equal rights of others? So again, getting down to the fundamentals, the sheriff only has the power to do what the people themselves have to do. He doesn't magically grow new powers. The government doesn't magically suddenly grow new powers that the people themselves don't have within themselves. So it's critical to understand the distinction that the government can only do what we as individuals have the right to do, because that's only what we have the power to give the government to do. And if we were to limit the government to just that purpose, wouldn't life be grand? Since no individual acting separately can lawfully use force to destroy the rights of others, I can't come up to you and destroy your rights. You can't come and destroy mine. Logic dictates that the same principle applies to the common force, and it is nothing more than an organized combination of individual forces. Now, I'm being redundant on this because this is a foundational concept that we're going to build government from. Presuming this premise to be true, law is the organization of the natural right of lawful defense. Natural right of lawful defense. It is the substitution of common force for individual forces. The common force may only do what the individual forces have a natural and lawful right to do. So, to protect an individual's life, liberty, and property, to maintain the right of each, and to cause justice to reign among us all. If a nation were founded on this basis, order would prevail among the people in thought as in deed. Such a nation would have the most simple, easy to accept, economical, limited, non-oppressive, just and enduring government, imaginable whatever its political form might be. Under such an administration, everyone would understand that he or she possessed all the privileges as well as the responsibilities of his or her existence. No one would have any argument with government, provided that his person was respected, his labor was free, and fruits thereof was protected against unjust attack. And when successful, we would not have to thank the state for our successes. When unsuccessful, we would have no more to blame than a farmer would have to blame the state because of hail or frost. So simple, simple, simple. Very simple. So simple that it's almost painful. It's this simple. The state would be felt only by the invaluable blessings of safety provided by this concept of government. Unfortunately, this is not the way it is. Law by no means confines itself to its proper functions. The law has gone further than this. It has acted in direct opposition to its own purpose. The law has been used to destroy its own objective. Power corrupts absolute, power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton said that. For some reason, when you put power into the hands of people and don't restrain that power, the power gets abused and it goes outside the scope. But how does this start? Today, law is being applied to annihilating the justice that it was supposed to maintain, the limiting and destroying rights which its real purpose was to respect. The law has placed the collective force at the disposal of the unscrupulous who wish without risk to exploit the life, liberty, and properties of others. Now, I just made a leap. I went from something really simple to something extremely complex, and I've left a gap as to how we got there, and now I'm going to fill in that gap. We know that the law is not being used merely to protect our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But what is the law being used for today, and why? The why is because of greed, which is really on steroids, avarice, and false philanthropy. You know, you want to take the institutions that were set up to secure our life, liberty, and property, and then you want to use them for philanthropy, which is a redistribution of wealth system. And the law has actually converted plunder into a right in order to protect legal plunder. The law has converted lawful defense into a crime in order to punish lawful defense. So we've got a system today where the law has been turned on its head, and it's being used for reasons other than its original premise, which was to secure these rights. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. I'm going to take a little side trip here. I didn't tell you who I am. My oldest son is 25 years old. When he was 18, he decided to get a Social Security number. We didn't get him a Social Security number when he was born. The reason we didn't get him a Social Security number when he was born was because I had begun studying laws about 5 years prior to that, and I came to the conclusion back then that Social Security was a benefit, and it felt an awful lot like it might be a socialist benefit. And so I wanted to experiment and not get my son the Social Security number. So that was 25 years ago. I wanted to try it on. As a matter of fact, I went so far as to write Social Security and tell them that I didn't want their number. I wrote them what they call a rescission document. And I basically told Social Security, I didn't know what I was doing when I got this number, so I'm giving it back to you. And thank you very much. And from that day, I started living life without a Social Security number. And I got to tell you, life gets tough. When everywhere you go, they want a Social Security number. I had 3 more sons. My second son is 22. He still doesn't have a Social Security number. My third son is 20. He still doesn't have a Social Security number. And my fourth son is 18. And he doesn't have one. My first son is working as a manager at a restaurant in Gunnison. My second son has finished 2 years of college. And every time he was told he needed a Social Security number to enroll in college, we went and talked with the president of the college and explained to him how that was not true, and showed him a letter that we had from Social Security that specifically says that having a number is not required in this country. The idea of Social Security, so now the college there in Gunnison has been educated on the concept that Social Security is a voluntary system. And so now he has educated the staff of Western State College, and it made it a lot easier for my second son to come through when he enrolled too. In 1989, I'm 56 years old. In 1987, 86, someone told me that you didn't need a driver's license to drive a car. And I said, you know, that sounds, I don't buy it. I'm not buying that. So I took on the study for a couple of years, and in 1989, my driver's license expired, and I didn't renew it. And I decided to go out on the road as a guinea pig and see what would happen. I've spent time in jail. I've spent time in court. I've spent a lot of money in educating myself, trying to figure out how to get out of trouble. I got my legal education in the trenches. I got my legal education because it was a matter of survival. About 6 years into 1995, 96, I enrolled in a paralegal school over in Denver, University of Northern Colorado, because I wanted to learn all of the things that I didn't know for the past 10 years between 1996 and 1986. And so I graduated from that course and learned how to speak the language of the system. But I still didn't have a driver's license. and at least not one that was recognized by the state. I went out and found a church in Oregon that had this crazy idea that the kingdom of heaven was real and we should be working to establish it on earth as it is in heaven. And they were coming from a political angle. So I decided, you know, that sounds like a pretty good idea. I think I'll try that on. So I had a driver's license issued to me by a church. I also had a passport and a car registration and a license plate. And I decided to go see just how much trouble I could get in. And I got in a lot. Trouble came looking for me. I just wanted to be left alone. Now let me back up a little bit more. In 1993, I met with a group of men in Estes Park. What had just happened was in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, a woman had been shot holding her 9-month-old baby, and Sammy Weaver had been shot in the back and killed by a couple of federal agents. And it was represented to the American people that these were some really mean, wicked, nasty, awful people. But I started investigating into it, and I learned that this was just an American family that wanted to be left alone. So I got invited to a meeting in Estes Park that I went to, and there was about 150 guys showed up, and there was one question on the table. What do we do when a government agency attacks an American family? That was the question on the table. And we stayed together for a week, and we analyzed that question from every conceivable angle for about a week. At the end of that week, we decided that there's nothing that we could do at this point, but we all agreed that next time we saw a government agency attack an American family like that, that we would go and interpose ourselves between the federal agency and the family. About 9 months later, Waco, Texas happened. The Branch Davidian compound church was raided by the government, and I told my wife, I think I have to go, and she said, I know. So I grabbed a guy, and I expected to see 152 guys down there with everyone bringing a friend. Well, we got down there, and there was only 4 of us that showed up the first week, and gradually people started filtering in. But while I was down in Waco, I witnessed firsthand the brutality of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau. And I also learned how cowardly the sheriff of that particular county was when we went to go talk to him about why he wasn't out there interposing in behalf of those church people. We also went and talked to the Texas Rangers and asked them why were they letting the federal government come into Texas without having any jurisdiction. 3 weeks later, we were 100% convinced that no one really cared what happened at that church. And I walked away about as brokenhearted, and it was a wake-up call for me. When I got home and the church was burning down, I'd studied law long enough to know that something was real wrong in America, and so I finished a personal declaration of independence that I had been working on. And I threw off the government because I didn't know where to start my revolution. So I started it with me. So I filed my personal declaration of independence with the clerk and recorder's office, and I noticed the governor and several other state officials that I was withdrawing my allegiance, that I was withdrawing my consent to be governed by a system of government that was no longer representing the people. And I cited about 28 causes of action against the government, and began everyone in my family thought that I had gone off the deep end, and I counted the cost of that, and I knew that that's how it would appear, but I couldn't figure out any other way for me to learn what it was I thought I needed to know to be able to properly respond to a circumstance like that without using force. So I used the law instead. And so, given those foundations, I would get pulled over and I would fight traffic tickets in traffic court. I'd been before 5 or 6 jury trials I've taken a couple of cases to the United States Supreme Court, a couple to the state Supreme Court, never won a thing. I've learned how to do things wrong. I know all the wrong way to do things. I've run out of wrong way to do things. And this is why I don't feel completely worthy to even talk to you, because I've made a lot of mistakes, and like I said, I know what doesn't work. So through the process of elimination, I'm working on a light bulb, and one of these days it's going to work. So that's my legal background. I don't have a sheepskin from Harvard University. I got all my training in the trenches. So I'm a street fighter, and they've taught me well. They've taught me real well. They cheat, they lie, they steal, they change the issue, they don't stay on point. And you know what? You don't know a country's government until you've spent time in its jails. And it was Nelson Mandela that said that. And I know more than you know, because I've spent time in jail and I've talked to a lot of people in jail, and I tell you what, this country is not the country that you think it is. And the evidence is sitting in the jails. So you really want to go find out what America's like? So, looking for a remedy. My objective, and I just had this conversation with Kelly and Dan, my objective is truth. Truth drives me. I'm obsessed by it. I've lost friends because of it. I'm misunderstood because I won't stay in a particular dogma or doctrine. I keep challenging everything I thought was true in order for me to come into a better understanding, because we're living in a day of total confusion and chaos. And I'm looking for some stability and some fundamentals that work. America's not working, and I want to know why, because I want to be part of the solution, not the problem. So if you think of me as a radical, you're right, because I started with the principles of the Declaration of Independence and began a battle of my own. I didn't recruit anybody to join me, and my sons are in it because I am. My marriage has suffered a lot because of it as well. So let's get back to that. Self-preservation and self-development are common aspirations among all people. If everyone enjoyed the unrestricted use of his or her faculties and the free disposition of the fruits of his or her labor, social progress would be ceasing, interrupted, and unfailing. But another tendency that is common among people is when they can, they wish to live and prosper at the expense of others. This fatal desire has its origin in the very nature of man, in that primitive, universal, and insuppressible instinct that impels us to satisfy our desires with the least possible pain. You know, we vote our pocketbook, right? We've all heard that. So are we really voting for what's best for America, or are we voting from a place of special interest or personal self-interest? Premise: we live and satisfy our wants only by ceaseless labor. Now, if I was a spiritual being and could snap my fingers and have a meal, I suppose that wouldn't be a correct premise. But I haven't arrived at that place yet. I'm stuck in this body, and I haven't learned to work miracles. I don't walk on water. I don't claim to be Jesus or anybody special like that. So I have to rely on this premise that we live and satisfy our wants only by ceaseless labor, by the ceaseless application of our faculties to natural resources. This process is the origin of property. Capitalism, your brain is yours, your mind is yours, your labor is yours, your body is yours. These are the gifts that we've been endowed with by our Creator. The reason for government is to serve us in securing to us the freedom to enjoy those gifts. That's the function of a free system. When we end up being wards of the state and serving the state, and the state becomes the reason for our existence, that's an upside-down system. In the alternative manner, a woman may satisfy his or her wants by seizing and consuming the products of the labor of others. This process is the origin of plunder. If I come and take your stuff, that's unlawful, illegal, immoral, and that's wrong. And America's government is set up to secure that principle, to keep me from plundering you, to keep you from plundering me, to keep this group from plundering that group. That's the original intent. Since man is naturally inclined to avoid pain, and since labor is pain, it follows that men will resort to plunder whenever plunder is easy.